So what do you do if you're about to give a speech, a big presentation? If you're like a lot of people, you get a little bit nervous and you gather a wheelbarrow in the audience or in the office and you start going around and gathering data, gathering files. You go to your colleagues. Hey, Cecilia, that presentation you gave last week, give me all your slide deck. You go to another colleague. Hey, Jane, give me all the graphics you had for that topic. You go through all your files and you gather more and more and more. Your wheelbarrow is getting stacked higher and higher and higher. And now, it's the big day of your presentation. What do? You're sort of backing that wheelbarrow into the conference room. It's heavy. You can just get it in. And then you got to figure out, what do I leave in? What do I leave out? And you're thinking, well, if I leave this out, well, Smithers, he's going to criticize me and say I wasn't prepared. I better put that in. If I leave this out, well, this TJ guy, he's obnoxious. He's going to be trashing me on Twitter before the speech is even over. And if I leave this out, well, Samantha, she's the toughest of all. She's going to have me fired if I leave that out. So you know what? I better play it safe, cover all my bases, say everything quickly, dump all the data quickly, get it all out there, and no one can accuse me of leaving anything out. I will have covered my you know what. You ever deliver a speech like that? Do you ever encounter a speech like that? Chances are you have. How does it make you feel if you're in the audience and you've been subjected to something like that? If you're like most people, it's kind of like, it's just overwhelming. And it's just boom, boom. It's too much stuff. So what do most people do in that situation? They check their email because it's just too overwhelming. It's not interesting. You can't follow along. So of all the problems my clients face in every industry all over the world, that's the number one problem, is they try to dump way too much data in a speech. Way too many messages in a presentation. So the first thing you've really got to learn if you want to be a good speaker or certainly a great speaker is you've got to learn some discipline. You've got to learn how to narrow your message down to just a handful. Hi, I'm TJ Walker. I want to thank you for joining us today on behalf of GoSkills. I want to share with you some of the top lessons you're going to learn if you go into the GoSkills public speaking courses and that I teach on a daily basis to presidents of countries, prime ministers, Nobel Peace Prize winners, Miss Universes, professional athletes all over the globe. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Bangkok conducting a presentation training, and I start the way I do most of the time, in this beautiful Four Seasons hotel. Fabulous, every kind of food delicacy is out there for us every hour. I've got the beginning of the day, there are 12 participants in the room. I start the way I normally do. I'll say, I want all of you to think of the best speaker you've seen in the last year, maybe the last 5 years, last 10 years, someone in your field and someone in your industry where you saw them in the room. Now, I want you to tell me every message point, number, fact you remember from this speech. I don't care about their style, whether they moved their hands or they were funny. That's all interesting, but that's beside the point. I just want to know the messages you remember, what content stuck. We went around the room. Adrian, how many do you remember? No, all the speakers I see are boring. Janice, how many do you remember? Well, there was this one guy, TJ, and I remember just these 2 points. We went around the room. Someone else mentioned 3. And that was it. A lot of people didn't remember anything. Now, I do this at the beginning of every in-person public speaking presentation training workshop I do. And often the answer is 0, 1, 2, occasionally 3, sometimes 4. Every 6 months, someone in the audience, someone I'm training, will remember 5 key points from the best speaker they've seen perhaps in their life. In all the years I've asked that question, I've been asking it now for decades, I've never had anyone remember more than 5 ideas from the best speaker they've ever seen. So that tells me if you want to be a great speaker, you got to narrow your messages down to a handful or fewer. Because remember, it's not communication if it comes out of your mouth. It's only communication if your audience actually remembers it. That's the number one problem most people have. It's not that they say uhs or ums, or they don't know what to do with their hands, or they pace around too much. Those are minor problems compared to the biggest problem, which is dumping way too much data. So the first challenge I have for all of you, anytime you're giving a presentation, is brainstorming all the possible message points, ideas, facts you have, and then truly narrow them down. Make sure you figured out exactly what's most important. And don't be greedy. You know what they say, the greedy pigs get slaughtered. So much of being a good speaker, a good communicator, a good presenter has nothing to do with the sound of your voice or your eye contact. It just has to do with judgment. And when you refuse to make a judgment, when you say, well, I'll just give them everything, you're failing. You're abdicating your responsibility. It's your job to figure out, of all the things you could talk about, what's most important to this audience. What do they truly have to know? They don't have to know everything you know. If they knew everything that you knew, they'd have your job. They don't want your job. You don't want them to have your job. It's your job to make sure your audience knows just what is most important to them. As the writer Mark Twain once said, and a lot of famous writers have been credited with this quote, "I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short letter." It actually requires more time, more effort, and more thought to narrow it down than it is to just tell people everything. A lot of people get up to give a speech and they think their choice is, am I thorough and hardworking and communicate 70 ideas? Or am I kind of lazy and shallow and only cover a handful? That's what people think their choice is. I live in the real world. In the real world, the choice is, do you actually communicate a handful of ideas or nothing? That's the real world choice. So that's the first step if you want to be a good speaker, because let's not forget our real goals here. When we speak, we want to come across comfortable, confident, relaxed, of course. We need people to understand us, but they've got to remember our messages before they can do what we want. The ultimate goal for you when you speak is to have influence over your audience, whether you're trying to get them as a new client, get them to invest with you, get them to hire you if you're presenting during a job interview, get their vote if you're a political candidate running for office. Anytime you're speaking in the adult world, the business world, and for that matter, sometimes in school, you want your audience to do something. So everything we're about here today, everything I'm about in the public speaking courses here at GoSkill, and everything that I talk about every single day with new videos on my Facebook page, TJ Walker Speak to Influence, is all about this one thing, helping you influence your audience. If you have questions today, this isn't going to be one of these stiff, formal, boring, write down all your questions, submit them to the authorities where they'll be vetted, and an hour from now we'll look at them. No, we'll answer them in real time. So you have a chat box to your right of the screen. You can just type in your questions at any point, and my colleague Cecilia will read them out to me, and we'll answer them in real time. Again, I want to appreciate your time in being with us today, and we will take questions at the end as well. Okay, so you've figured out exactly what your messages are. Now, the big challenge for most people is getting them remembered. The number one way to get people to remember your message is to tell a story. Now, all of us tell stories all day long to family, friends, colleagues, to people in the hallway where we work, and yet we stand up to give a so-called formal speech. The first thing most people throw away is the story because they think it's not serious. All of my research shows, and working with people just like you all over the world, is that story is the number one way to get people to listen, to understand, to pay attention, and to actually remember. I wish you didn't have to tell stories. Unfortunately, I don't know of any more effective way to get people to remember, because just telling them, I'm going to tell you something, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you what I told you, that isn't going to work. Because if you say it in a boring way each time, it just isn't going to work. So stories are critically important. And I'll tell you more about that in just a minute. But first, a little about me. How did I get here? I wasn't some natural born speaker. I was incredibly shy as a kid. I hardly said anything. And somehow ended up in this career and have learned through trial and error, through successes. I've had wonderful successes, standing ovations from speeches, but I've been booed off stages before too. And the reason I'm here is I want to share with you my mistakes, and so you can learn the easy way from other people, not by learning from yourself. I remember one of my worst speaking experiences. It was more than 20 years ago. I was down in South Florida in the United States on a local talk radio show. It was political season, and President Bill Clinton was running for re-election. I said a couple of nice things about him. I'll never forget, the host is very angry. He's on the opposite side of the political aisle. So he grabs the microphone out of my hand and says, Mr. Walker, I have more respect for a Klansman, a Ku Klux Klansman, than I do for you. I was shocked at what he said. I hadn't said anything that inflammatory. But I figure, hey, I'm a tough guy, and I'd already been a media trainer and a public speaking trainer for a handful of years. I wasn't going to put up with that. So I'm fighting back. I'm pulling the microphone back. Yeah, but Mr. Stick, what I really think, before I could say anything else, he reaches under the table. Now, it's a talk radio show in Florida. No one can see this except for me. He reaches under the table, pulls out a gun, and points it at me. Now do you see my point, Mr. Walker? You know what I said at that point? Not much. It was not my finest moment. I didn't have any quick, clever rejoinder. It was not a great talk show appearance. But you know what? I didn't let it bother me. I didn't let it end my career going on talk radio or speaking. In fact, I went back to that station a couple weeks later and even hosted other talk shows. Now, I stayed away from that host. I still think he's crazy. But I enjoy speaking, and I enjoy helping other people speak, and that's why I go back to it again and again. And I don't let one awful speech or one awful talk show appearance define me. And all true great speakers have bad days. They have bad speeches. You have to keep on going, and you can't let it bother you. Okay, let's step back for a minute. What did I just do there? I told a story. Why did I tell a story? Is it because I want to be self-indulgent and tell you how great I am? No. In fact, in that story, I didn't look that great. I looked kind of stupid. I simply wanted to convey a message. I wanted you to know that your trainer is someone who has been at this a while, has experienced successes and failures, and isn't someone who just kind of came into this because last week I was doing Excel spreadsheet training, which, by the way, GoSkills has great instructors for that, but I'm not one of them. I wanted you to have a sense that your trainer today has experience in this and has a commitment to it. That's why I told the story. It's really just one idea. But by telling you a story with a setting, a Florida talk radio station, a character, me, the host, a little emotion, he pulled a gun on me, a problem, I'm scared, how I felt, a little dialogue, what I said back, that's all the story is. It only took a couple of minutes, but people remember it. In fact, I've had people come up to me 15 years later who've been in my in-person presentation training classes. Say, hey, TJ, have you had any guns pulled on you lately? So, is it the greatest story ever? No. Is it going to win me a Nobel Prize for literature? No. But does it work? Yes. And is it true? Yes. The best stories are true because it's easier for you not to just say it, but to actually relive the experience. And that way you don't have to memorize. You're just sharing an experience you had. That's what makes it easy. Now, it doesn't have to be even your own experience. It can be a secondhand conversation where you're recounting what someone else said to you. By the way, one question I do get quickly from a lot of people in public speaking classes, and some of you have written in on this question who are in the online presentation training class in GoSkills. People ask me, TJ, what's the best way to handle eye contact? And what I like to tell people is that there's really three types of eye contact. There's the bottom 1% of speakers. They're staring at the floor. Sometimes they're actually, reading their cell phone, their notes on their cell phone. They're ignoring you, or they're looking at a screen, or they're staring at the PowerPoint slides. You certainly don't want to be like that. That's the bottom 1%. There's the next sort of 98.9% of speakers. They're doing a version of the windshield wiper. Now, it might be slow, it might be fast. So they're looking at the audience, but they're looking at the whole room the whole time. When you're in the audience, you never really feel like that speaker's really talking to me. So it's certainly better than someone just staring down at notes, but there's not a personal connection. That's not what the best speakers do. You want to know what the top 0.1% of speakers do? Have any of you ever seen former U.S. President Bill Clinton speak? And forgive me for using so many U.S. references today. I do work all over the world, but most commonly in the U.S. Most people, whether they like Bill Clinton's politics or not, would agree he's an excellent public speaker. And I want to share with you one of his techniques. 20-so years ago, one of my trainers used to work for Bill Clinton just as a low-level campaign staffer. It was the end of a long day of campaigning, re-election time. They're tired, they're exhausted, they're sitting around a table, playing some cards, their sleeves are rolled up, having a beer. And my guy Andy turned to the president and said, Mr. President, you nailed that speech today. You had 10,000 people in the palm of your hand. How did you do it? You nailed it. It's a great speech. And President Clinton turned and says, Andy, it's very simple. I didn't talk to 10,000 people today. I looked at one person in the audience and I held eye contact for a couple of sentences, a full thought. And I imagined no one else in the whole room existed. And then I went to another person in the audience and I looked at that person for a full thought. It's only about 5 or 6 seconds, Andy. And then I went to another person, and I'm going around the room in a way that isn't machine gun-like. It's not mechanical. And when people feel me looking right at them, it's a powerful connection. I feel it, they feel it. They feel like, wow, the President of the U.S. is talking to me. Here's the trick, Andy, though. This works even when I'm on a stage, bright lights, and I can't even see the audience. Because if I look 100 feet out that way, and I keep my eyes constant for a couple of seconds. The 20 people in that area will feel that powerful impact as if I'm looking right at them. So what's the point of what I just did there? I just gave all of you a technical presentation. I could have put up a PowerPoint slide, 3 types of eye contact, 0.1% staring at notes, 98.9% windshield wiper, top 0.1% hold eye contact for 2 sentences. Purely technical information. I could have presented that in a slide, but instead I packaged it with a story. It took a couple minutes, but people remember it, and that is the power of story. The biggest difference between great speakers and awful speakers isn't their voice or their beautiful hair or how funny they are. It's the use of story to illustrate every key point in their presentation. Let's go to more questions or comments.
Sure. So we've got one question so far about telling stories. When telling stories, how do you not lose the point you're making? I get a bit lost when trying to tell a story.
The point is first. You have to figure out first and foremost what is the point you're trying to convey. So I've just told you a couple of stories. I decided in advance I wanted to make a very specific point about eye contact and how I want you to really look at people in your audience and hold eye contact for a couple of sentences. I decided that was the point. I then went and thought about how can I tell an interesting story that's true to make this come alive. So I was focused on that point the whole time. The fact that I gave extra little details, like Andy and the president were sitting playing cards with their sleeves rolled up and drinking a beer, it's not crucial that you remember it, but it does enhance the actual memory process. Our memories are much more image processors than they are word processors. Think of it this way. If you go to a training conference or any other conference in your industry and you meet someone and you exchange business cards and then you bump into them 3 weeks later, do you remember the full spelling and their title on their business card, or do you remember their face? Most people would say, oh, I remember the face. That's because your brain is an image processor. But one way is to practice your story out loud and watch it on video. And if it seems rambling to you, if it's taking 20 minutes, well, then you've got to pare it back, refine it. But that's the best way. And that's going to lead me to one of our follow-up points here, which you've got to practice this stuff on video in order to see how it comes across. I don't have to worry about whether I seem lost or rambling on those last 2 stories I told you, because I've seen myself give those stories before on numerous videos. So that's the ultimate test. Practice on video. Figure out what can you get rid of. Is it confusing anyone? And test with other people. Were there any other questions so far?
Yes, we have one more question from Sarah. How do you avoid interjecting politics into a speech that has nothing to do with politics?
Don't talk about it, especially in these times. I don't know what country you're in. I'm here in the United States, but I train all over the world, 20 countries around the world. And you have to know your audience. I mean, there are certain audiences I go to where I just know everybody in that audience has a very particular opinion that is the exact same opinion as I do about the president of a major North American country, in which case I can talk about that and I'm on safe ground. If I'm talking in the United States, for example, I know that there's a good chance that anything I say about a current political leader here, half of the audience will absolutely hate my guts and not listen to a single thing else that I say. So I just have to not talk about that. You've got to figure out what you want to focus on. People can ask questions. You can't control the audience. You can't control the questions. But you have 100% control over what comes out of your mouth. So if someone wants to say, well, what do you think of Prime Minister so-and-so? Is he an ignoramus? You don't have to use that person's word or use their dichotomy. We're going to take more of your questions at the end. We'll take them sprinkled throughout. But right now I have to get to the next point, which is to talk about PowerPoint. Now, I love PowerPoint. I use it sometimes 5 days a week. But let's face it, most PowerPoint is awful. Most PowerPoint puts people to sleep. It's not that PowerPoint is bad. When you say PowerPoint is bad, that's like saying television is bad. Well, yeah, there is a lot of bad television on these days and certain trashy reality shows. But if you love World Cup soccer, World Cup football, and you can't travel to the game, all of a sudden television is great if you can watch your favorite team on TV. So television, PowerPoint slides, they're just a medium. And they can be used in a good way, a bad way, a boring way, or an effective way. The most effective way to use PowerPoint is to focus on one idea per slide and to use an image, not text. Let me say that again, because people hear me say that and they say, yeah, but teacher, how many bullet points and how many words per bullet points? They're not listening to me. I am advocating that you never use bullet points or words on a PowerPoint slide if your goal is to actually communicate. Now, if your boss says, do a PowerPoint slide and it's got to have 10 bullet points and 10 words per bullet point or you're fired, in that case, do it that way. But realize at that point, you're not focused on actually communicating, you're focused on job preservation. And that's a worthy goal too, but it's not the same thing as giving an effective speech. Now, I test audiences all over the world, and what I have found is that audiences do not remember words and bullet points on slides. They just don't. What audiences remember are images. One of the most effective PowerPoint slides of all time that was later turned into an Academy Award-winning movie, and we're not here to talk about politics, some of you might not like him. Al Gore did a PowerPoint slide on global warming many years ago. And he didn't just put up facts and numbers, he put up pictures. Here is this glacier 20 years ago, and it's all white and mountainous. Here it is today, and it's green, and there's birds, and there's grass. He used pictures to drive home the point. My advice is if you're going to use PowerPoint, to apply a certain test to every slide. Ask yourself, does this slide truly make the idea I'm talking about more understandable to the audience than me just saying it? And does it make my idea more memorable than me just saying it? If you can't answer yes to both questions, you need to take that slide, tear it up, and throw it in the trash can. I actually advise that you use two separate PowerPoint presentations. One that you're projecting on a screen that has just images. One image per slide. And a second PowerPoint that you email to people, that you hand out, that has lots and lots of data, lots of text, complexity. If they want to read it, they will. If they don't want to read it, they don't have to, but at least you've given that to them. That is far and away the most effective way to use PowerPoint. I understand that's not how it's done most places. But you have to ask yourself, do you want to give a PowerPoint the way other people do, or do you want to give a PowerPoint that actually helps you communicate? Look at some of the top communicators in the world of the last decade or so. When Steve Jobs wanted to introduce the iPhone, he didn't put up a PowerPoint slide or the Apple version, the keynote slide that put up bullet points of how many megahertz and gigabytes and weight. He didn't put up a whole bunch of bullet points with facts and the technical specifics. He said, Why are we here today? You know what this is. And he put up a picture of an iPod. And he said, you know what this is? And he put up a picture of an old-fashioned cell phone. What do we have today? The images came together to show the iPhone. You instantly could figure out what it was by looking at one picture at a time. So that's the most effective way to use PowerPoint. I'm not saying text is bad. Give people more text than ever, but give it to them in a way they can actually use it. Email it to them. Hand it out. Before any in-person keynote speech I give, I email everybody in the room a couple of my books. In fact, you'll get access to those books in my online presentation training course at GoSkills. But I'm not going to stand up and go through a whole bunch of bullet points in front of people, because that isn't how people like to be talked to. It isn't how people remember things. So that's what you really need to know about PowerPoint. Yes, you can have all sorts of gizmos and special effects and dissolves. I'll never forget one time I was down in the Caribbean doing a presentation training at a major oil refinery. And an engineer was giving a presentation, and there was a little bird that fluttered across his page. And this was maybe 15 years ago, so it was kind of new and exciting then. And as soon as he was done, all the other engineers in the training said, wow, that was so cool. How'd you do that? That was great. What did you think, TJ? That was great. That was fantastic. And I said, well, it was certainly interesting to look at. Now, who can tell me what the message was of that slide? Nobody could tell me. The special effects overwhelmed the slide. It replaced the message. So it's a complete waste of time to junk up your slides with special effects and dissolves and builds. Complete waste of time, in my view, unless you're giving a presentation on how you're a great special effects artist. If that's the focus of your presentation, then by all means, show people your special effects. Here's the thing. Anyone in a business audience, a civic audience, a Chamber of Commerce audience that you're likely to speak to, they have already seen special effects their whole life on major Hollywood blockbusters, Steven Spielberg movies, Star Wars movies. They've seen movies with $500 million worth of special effects. So if you start to spend your time building special effects, you're competing with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. That's not a competition I want to enter, because I'm going to lose that. I don't want to be compared on the basis of my special effects. I want to be compared to the boring speaker before me, and now I'm saying something interesting. You can learn a lot more about PowerPoint in the online course as well. Cecilia, do we have any other questions, comments? If you're holding back till the end of our webinar, we are taking questions and comments throughout. You can post your comments right there in the chat box, or you can wait till the end. I'm here for you. Any other comments, criticisms, suggestions, or questions so far?
Yes, we've got two more questions. One of them is related to PowerPoint. When using PowerPoint, I find it hard to pace myself and focus on the audience.
So if you're having trouble focusing on the audience and pacing, what that's telling me is, A, you didn't rehearse on video, which is the point we're going to get to next. Your pacing should be very easy if you've rehearsed a bunch of times and you know exactly how long things take. The next thing is, you got to remember, the PowerPoint slides are not for you. The PowerPoint slides are for your audience. You shouldn't ever be looking at your slides. Why are you even looking at your slides? I don't understand. I'm kidding. I do understand why you're doing it. The way most people use their PowerPoint slides is they're using it as the poor man's, the poor woman's teleprompter. Oh, I don't have time to memorize a 30-minute speech. I'll just put the bullet points up on a PowerPoint and then I can sort of read to people. Of course, everyone hates it when someone else reads to them, but then we as speakers get up and we read bullet points to people. Horrific. So I recommend, then again, follow my principles. I'm saying use one image per idea per slide. So once you put it up and you've glanced at it for half a second, there's nothing else to look at. You need to now be looking at your audience. But it begs the question, if you don't have all your notes and all your outline in a text format on your PowerPoint slides, how are you going to remember what to say? How are you going to know where to go next? How are you going to know if you forgot something? Well, I have a very sophisticated technology that keeps me on track, so I know exactly what my next point is, exactly where I'm going, and exactly what needs to be said, where I am in the speech, and none of it is on the PowerPoint slide because I don't want my audience to see it. I want them to think that I just am talking to them and I'm having a conversation and I'm completely in the moment with them. So when I'm speaking, we have a couple hundred with us today. If we were all in a room, I would be walking around the room throughout this presentation. I would never stand behind a lectern, and I would appear to you just to be talking the whole time. But I'd actually be cheating because I'll be honest with you, I have a horrible memory. I have no idea what my first 3 points were, what my next ones are. I have no idea what's next in this presentation. But I have a sophisticated technology that keeps me on track at all times. And I'm going to sell this to you right now. It's very expensive. It costs roughly 1 penny. I'm using a cheat sheet. I'm using a piece of paper with large font. And if I'm in a large room, I'll have 3 exact same copies of my outline. The key to using an outline is you have it on a single sheet of paper. You make the font large enough so that you can see it without having to bend over or pick it up. Because if I were picking this up constantly, it would be very distracting. And it would give you the sense that I'm not really professional and I don't know what I'm talking about. But because I have limited to the key points in a few words to remind me, just in the normal course of looking down or grabbing a sip of water, I can see what my next point is. So it appears to be natural. That's how you get away from using your PowerPoint as notes. And I love technology. I got every kind of camera, and I got a TV studio in my home. I've got every kind of gizmo imaginable, but this little friend has never demanded a restart. This little friend has never asked for electricity. This friend has never asked for new batteries. So I highly, highly recommend to you using a cheat sheet for every presentation you give. The other advantage of that is if the PowerPoint doesn't work, the bulb burns out, the computers freeze, you don't care. You're ready to just present to people. You're never prepared to give a PowerPoint presentation unless you're prepared to speak without the PowerPoint. Okay, the next thing I'm about to tell you is far and away the most important part of this webinar. It's the most important thing I teach. It's actually the easiest thing to do, and it's the thing people hate doing the most. If you want to be ready for a presentation and you want to be completely confident and be good and know you're good and do a great job, you've got to practice your speech on video until you like it. I know you don't want to hear me say that. I would be much more popular if I just said, stand like Wonder Woman and tell yourself how wonderful you are and you'll be great. I'd have 33 million views on my YouTube channel if I said that. unfortunately, it doesn't work. The number one thing that works is practicing your speech on video. And you can just hold up your cell phone. You don't need anything fancy. About 15 years ago, I was working in an Eastern European country. It's my first time working over there, maybe about 20 years ago. I'm in an old dictator's palace. I'm working with a prime minister, a democratically elected prime minister. And we're surrounded by armed military guards. I'm in a remote location. And the prime minister turns to me and says, TJ, do you mind if I practice in my native Slovenian? I said, sure, go ahead. So he gets up, gives his speech, proceeds to read the whole time. Da, 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 da. I record it. We watch it. He turns to me and says, TJ, give me your honest opinion. What do you think? And I thought it was awful. I thought it was really boring. Monotone, no eye contact. But I'm also a little nervous. What do I say? I'm in this strange area. I don't know where the embassy is. I'm surrounded by guys with guns, and he's the leader of the country. But I finally said, he's paying me a lot of money. I better tell him my honest truth. And I said, with all due respect, sir, I don't know what you were saying, but you bored the heck out of me. He looked shocked. He looked at me. He looked at the guys with the guns. He looked at the TV screen. And he said, you know what? You're right. It is incredibly boring. And he took his speech and he tore it up and he threw it on the floor. We got a clean notepad out and we started from scratch. And that's frankly how I start most of my presentation trainings with people is the speech they prepared, it turns out it's awful and it bores them to death. Turns out you're a pretty good judge of what's a good speech and what isn't a good speech. You have been listening to speeches your whole life. Use that expert. You know what bores you to death. But here's the key thing that everyone doesn't get. Sometimes people practice a speech on video and they don't look at it. They, well, I did my rehearsal. Complete, utter waste of time. Sometimes people practice, watch, and then they make notes of 29 things they didn't like. Oh, I learned a lot. And they think they're ready. That's not a waste of time. That's actually making things worse. Because if you've only watched yourself speak on video once, the final image you have in your brain is just of all the things you don't like. What's wrong, what's bad, what's awful. So that's a horrible thing to do. What you have to do is practice on video. Figure out what do you like, what do you not like. Do it again. Do more of what you do like. Do less of what you don't like. Look at it again. Look at it, record it. You keep doing that. Now, part of the homework for my in-person workshops that I do all over the world is I tell people before our day of training together, I need you to send me a speech on video. And I need you to send me a speech where you are convinced it's the best you can do at your current skill level. And I had a client the other day tell me he did his practice speech video 107 times. Now you may ask, well, TJ, is this guy unemployed? How does he have that much time? He was the CEO of a major technology company. He had 10,000 employees reporting to him from all over the world. He still found time to practice his speech 107 times before he was happy with it. And that's the real secret. If you want to get over nervousness, practice until you can look at a video of yourself and you love it. At that point, it becomes virtually impossible to be nervous. Because what makes us nervous is fear of the unknown. We're thinking, they may be thinking TJ's really boring and stupid and dumb and blah, blah, blah. If I'm worried about that, it means I didn't actually practice, refine, figure out what I'm giving to you. So if you're nervous, all that means is you didn't prepare. There's this whole school of thought of, oh, it's great to be nervous, just channel it. If you have, these nervous butterflies in your stomach, it's okay as long as they fly in the same format. That's complete nonsense. If one of your employees said, gosh, I'm really nervous about sending this memo to our most important client because it might be filled with typos and spelling errors and smudge marks, you wouldn't say to the employee, oh, there, I'm sure it'll be okay. You'd say, what are you talking about, you fool? Spell check it, review it, have someone else look at it, make sure it's great before you hit send. That's what you do in text. Guess what? You can do exactly the same thing with your speech. Now, when I started in this business 33 years ago, video cameras were big, bulky, and expensive. My clients actually had an excuse not to videotape every single speech. You don't have that excuse. Everybody is surrounded. Every cell phone, every iPad, laptop. There are probably a dozen video cameras within 30 feet of you right now. So it's not a technical problem. It's not a finance problem. It's an emotional problem. Oh, TJ, I don't like looking at myself. Get over it. Everyone else has to look at you. Everyone else has to hear your voice. So you need to know how you're coming across. If you do that, you're almost home free. There's only one final step you really need to take. If you want to really be supremely confident knowing your speech is going to work, test it. There's this whole school of thought that says public speaking is a so-called soft skill. They make it sound like a class on basket weaving and petting puppies. I believe every aspect of public speaking is just as quantifiable as any aspect of math, accounting, or physics. If you have to give a presentation to 40 clients on Thursday, you can test your speech to a couple of colleagues Tuesday at lunch and figure out, are they remembering your messages or not? Are they remembering your slides or not? If not, you haven't communicated. You fail. The speech is not designed properly. So what I recommend is for every major presentation speech you're giving to test it in advance. You can do it two ways. You can grab a couple of colleagues together at lunch and give them your speech. When you're done, just ask them, what do they take away? What do they remember? I ask people that all the time. And if they say, well, TJ, I remember that you're dynamic and you're full of energy and you're a great presenter. If that's what someone tells me, then I know I was a complete, utter failure. I don't want them commenting on my style. I want them telling me the exact messages, the exact lessons they learned that are going to help them. The other technique you can use is record your speech on video, send it to a handful of friends, ask them to watch it. Then just call them up and ask them what they remember. Your friends can lie to you and say you look as good as you did 25 years ago, but they really can't lie to you and tell you they remember your messages if they don't remember them. And this is pretty concrete, folks. If you give your presentation to two colleagues Tuesday for that Thursday presentation to 40 clients, if the two people in your office don't remember any of your slides, they don't work. Throw them in the trash can. If they're only getting 3 of the 5 messages you're trying to convey, keep those 3, keep what you're saying. You've got to go back to the drawing board to figure out how to make those other 2 messages more memorable. Keep practicing, keep testing until it actually works. That's the real secret from the greatest speakers in the world. Martin Luther King Jr. went down in history as giving, at least to U.S. audiences, the greatest speech of the 20th century with his I Have a Dream speech. What people don't realize is that he gave 300 other speeches that year. And pretty much every word from his famous I Have a Dream speech, he gave parts of it, sections of it, numerous times in other speeches. Some of the time when it wasn't received very well. some of the time when there was no clapping or standing ovation. He practiced, he rehearsed, he did it again and again and again. Great speakers are people who speak often. And that's the biggest way you really get better. That's why I'm happy that many of you have already signed up for my presentation course on GoSkills, because it gives you an opportunity to practice. People ask me, TJ, you seem very comfortable. I'm comfortable speaking to you here or in front of 1,000 people because I speak every day. And I mean literally every day. If you go to my Facebook page, which is TJ Walker Speak to Influence, you'll see new training videos and tips there 7 days a week. So I hope you check that out when we're done here. But also check out the special discounts that GoSkills is offering to you today so you can continue to improve your skills. I mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. a moment ago. Some of you in America have heard of a very famous talk show host, Rush Limbaugh. They're on the opposite sides of the political spectrum. Rush Limbaugh at this point has made $1 billion speaking and has the largest audience of people listening to him every day. Martin Luther King Jr. still has huge impact because of his words, even though he was assassinated so many decades ago. But what people don't realize about both of these men, what they had in common, they both took a public speaking course in college and got the grade of C, complete average. And yet they went on to be wildly influential speakers. And that's really my message to you. There's no such thing as a natural-born speaker or innate talent. It's a skill that anyone can learn and that all of you can learn today. Thanks so much for spending time with me. We have a little time for a few questions, comments, criticisms, and suggestions. Cecilia will open up the floor.
Great. We've got a question from Sherry. If you cannot think of a story on your own, could you not use another person's story from history that enforces your point?
You could use, by the way, everyone can hear you, or do I need to repeat the question?
No, they should be able to hear me.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Here's the thing. If you're trying to convey a major point in your presentation, and you've never had a single conversation with anyone about it, I've got to question, how important is that point? Now, if you're in a purely academic environment, that's one thing. But if you're in a business world where you help clients, you're dealing with customers, colleagues, chances are you've had a conversation. So I would urge you to really rack your brain and think about any time you've actually had a conversation with someone. It doesn't have to be exciting or as dramatic as someone pulling a gun on you, the way I used in my example earlier. It did actually happen to me. Sometimes a story is just, it's 5 o'clock, I'm getting ready to go home, I'm cleaning up my cubicle, the phone rings, and it's Smithers from the Detroit office saying, hey TJ, how are things in New York? And then he said, and I just go into a little snippet of a conversation about the issue and about the problem. Most of the time, that's preferable, because if you're giving a story from history, and if people have heard it before, that gives them an excuse to, you guessed it, check their email. And then we've lost them. So the more you can personalize it, the better. I mean, any story is better than no story, as long as it is relevant to the point. But the more personal it is, and I don't mean embarrassing in any way, but the more it's specific to actual conversations you had, the better. You don't have to make yourself the hero or the goat of the story, but just involving yourself. Again, if you're in any kind of business, you have to talk to clients and customers and prospects and colleagues about problems and challenges. That will make up the bulk of where your stories come from. So good luck with your stories in the future. But again, if you find yourself saying, I don't have a story for this, I would err on the side of not even covering that in your presentation. It's obviously not very important if you've never had a conversation with anyone about it. Other questions or comments, Cecilia?
Yes, we have one last question from John. At my work meeting, we are only given a short time to present as a group. Any tips on group presentations and time limits?
Well, first of all, you got to realize there really is no such thing as a group presentation. I know what you mean, but when you are standing, it's not 8 people talking at exactly the same time. It's just you. So at some point, you got to realize I can't necessarily control everyone else, but when I've got my time, and your time may be 60 seconds, make the most of it. Your boss, your clients, your colleagues are judging you at that particular moment. They're not judging the group. So you've got to make sure your part is great. Now, what really needs to happen in order to be effective in a group presentation, and nobody ever does this, but if you have the ability as a manager to get people to do it, you need to get people as a group together to rehearse on video. And you need to tell them, okay, we're not going to come in and talk about the presentation. We're actually going to deliver our presentations, watch them on video as a group, and figure out what works, what doesn't work, and redo it. It takes a little more time. You've got to ask yourself, is it worth it? I see organizations routinely spend hundreds of hours on a new business pitch for an advertising agency, for example, or consulting company. They'll spend hundreds of hours gathering data, building slides for their new business pitch, and they spend 0 minutes actually rehearsing on video to see how it comes across. And it's so often horrible. I've had to sit in them with clients before where you see one person after another stand up and kind of read bullet points, and they're focused on the wrong thing. They're focused on, we were told we have 25 minutes. Did we fit it into 25 minutes? That's not what's important. What's important is, did you make the ideas you really care about more understandable and memorable so they'd actually motivate the audience to do what you want? That has to be the focus. Because too often what happens is people think, oh, I've got to tell people everything about what my division is, and I only have 2 minutes, so I better speak really quickly and read through the bullet points quickly. Wrong. You're better off communicating one idea in a memorable way if you only have 2 minutes for a group presentation and let other people focus on other parts. Good luck with your group presentations. Do we have any other questions? By the way, if we don't get to you today in our allotted time, you can always email me a question, tj@tjwalker.com. You can also post questions for me on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/tjwalkerspeaktoinfluence. And as I mentioned, there are new videos and tips there 7 days a week. So that's a great way of augmenting and enhancing the courses you're going through here at GoSkills. We are officially at the end of our time. I want to thank all of you for joining me today on behalf of GoSkills. I'm TJ Walker and Media Training Worldwide. We're officially concluded. I will stay on if anyone has any remaining questions, but to respect those of you who have strict time limits, we'll officially say goodbye. And we're going to post up here in just a moment a special offer from GoSkills on a discount for this course and others. Cecilia, did we have any other burning questions right now that need to be addressed?
No, TJ, we've got no more questions.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate your time and hope to see you in the online class.